welcome to another episode of Curiosities in Psychology. So, today we're doing a bit of a different podcast discussing mental health when living overseas and how to cope with all the changes that come with living abroad. Because this is something that people are doing a lot these days, and we're kind of lucky that a lot of us have the freedom to travel and to live abroad. But often there's a lot of culture shock and kind of emotions that we might not have expected when we make the move. So today I'm joined by Darren Jonathon. So after moving to Australia, Darren started up his own podcast called Average Joe Down Under. And this provides travel and financial tips and kind of general life advice on moving to Australia. So welcome, Darren, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Hi, thank you very much for having me today.
No worries. So I guess the first general question would be, where were you actually living before you moved here, and what was it that prompted the move to Australia?
Yeah, so obviously with my accent, you can tell I've never lost it.
Yep.
But I've been here for about 13 years, and originally from Northern Ireland. So obviously very, very different to Australia. And what kind of prompted the move was, I suppose, I came here on holiday when I was about 15, and I always thought like, oh wow, what an amazing place to look at the weather, And I think over those kind of from about 15 to about 20, everybody had those let's go to Australia, do a working holiday sort of feel.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd potentially just give it a go. And
Yep.
that started the first part of the journey. And then I moved back home and realized, had this big epiphany and kind of wanted to come back and study. So eventually I came back and actually was an international student in 2012.
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think a lot of people have this kind of idea that like moving to the other side of the world is such an exciting thing, and it definitely can be. Um, but what were your kind of expectations or like perceptions before moving? Were there any particular worries you had, or did you kind of just think, oh, it'll be amazing? What were your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I think I was a bit naive. I had never really left home apart from travel. Travel is super like love to do. That's hence why what I do now. But travel has always been something that I just love doing. But this was the first time that I'd actually decided I had to move.
Mm.
And I just didn't know what to expect, and I was a bit naive. I just thought everything would you'd walk over there and everything would fall into place. And unfortunately, it wasn't as easy at the beginning, starting somewhere new,
Yeah.
than it was whenever you get yourself set up. But definitely, my perception of Australia was from a holiday perspective rather than a actual I'm living here. And
Yeah.
breathing, and all the same problems and everything that you still had kind of come with you, which I didn't really expect it to I thought they would disappear.
Yeah.
A bit naive of me. But then I was young. I was in my very early 20s, so
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Now, I feel like that's a common perception that like just moving somewhere else will change you or change their whole like lifestyle. But yeah, as you said, like you can't escape from
No.
problems or whatever. Um, what was your like initial impression when you first moved here? Do you remember like when you first got here, what it was that particularly struck you?
Yeah, well, I suppose in my head I was thinking something totally different, I guess, because I'd built up Australia in my head as surfing every day, and you live right beside the beach, and extremely naive of me. Because Sydney's just where I'm living right now, Sydney's huge. So like, you're at least 45 minutes from the beach if you don't live near the beach,
Yeah.
which is not easy to go every day. I just had this sort of weird perception that wasn't the case when I actually got here. Plus, I didn't expect in my head that there's so many multicultural, international students. Like, I just didn't expect it to be that focused. But then I guess I was in a big city, so very
Yeah.
different to sort of other cities in that respect. Now that I've
Yeah.
traveled,
Yeah.
yeah.
Were you living in a city in Ireland or was it in like a village?
Yeah, so very, 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 very different. I was living in we only have 340,000 people in the whole of Northern Ireland. So it's very small. Like, it's probably like a suburb here. So yeah, very, very totally different. Like, we're used to like having a field beside our house, or space. There's not as
Yeah.
many high-rise apartments or anything like that. So there was so many combining factors that kind of were a bit overwhelming, especially
Mm.
sensory, like stuff like so many people everywhere. you know
Yeah. Yeah, that big city feel, definitely.
yeah.
So you mentioned before, like, culture shock. So often, like in psych, people talk about the different phases of culture shock. I think there's usually like four or five, and they're all called different things. But there's like
Yeah.
generally the initial honeymoon phase, and then the culture shock phase, where people might feel kind of anxious or lonely, or that initial excitement has just faded. And there's the adjustment period, and then finally like the acceptance, I guess, of the new life.
Yeah.
Um, are you able to kind of pinpoint how you felt or anything that you felt in any of these phases and how you kind of dealt with it as you processed it?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, that 100% describes everything I felt over the years.
Yeah.
The honeymoon phase is definitely like a holiday. You treat it like a holiday.
Mm.
And I think I was treating every single year like a holiday until maybe like 2015, which was like at least 3 or 4 years in.
Yeah.
Um, and that then started probably a period of loneliness. Exactly what you said about the next phase. I felt like I couldn't adjust because I felt like I was torn between two places. Um, and mentally, it was very, very tough. That was probably one of the hardest few years of my life, actually. Like, I've never grown so much, I've never been challenged so much.
Mm.
There's times where I actually was like quite unwell, and I thought to myself, there's something not right with me. But I thought it was homesickness or whatever. But it actually was taking a toll on my mental health, and I didn't realize it was partly loneliness, culture shock, a bunch of different things that were all kind of happening at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned like being torn between like two different places. That seems to be a very common thing that people experience, I guess, moving somewhere else because you're kind of leaving behind or everything else is kind of on hold
Mm,
in your other life or where you used to live. Um, but then you're kind of moving on and it's, yeah, you're kind of in between. Can you describe that a
yeah.
bit more, how that felt?
Well, I guess that's the whole big part of the second phase. I guess your loneliness. You're feeling like people are moving on with their lives, and you're stuck being lonely, and you don't have anybody here, even though you probably do.
Mm.
It's just about the perception. I think now that I look back on it, I definitely was in a phase where people were asking me to do stuff, and I was saying no. But it
Yeah.
was because I was so deep in that. I would say nearly like a homesickness, depression type phase, loneliness, and all these combining factors. But when I look back and I see now, those people are still doing the exact same thing that they were 15 years ago, and I have moved on and grown and whatever. I think it was definitely my perception back then that things were
Yeah.
they were doing more than me, yet I
Mm.
was the one being challenged and going through all these things.
Yeah. Yeah. But like you said, I guess experiencing new things definitely makes you grow, even if you don't realize at the time. It can be really like a big struggle.
Mm,
Um, but yeah,
for
yeah,
sure. And I feel like sometimes your mind plays tricks on you. Like, it starts to, when you think on these things and ruminate on them so much that you become like it becomes your reality.
mm, yeah,
And sometimes it's hard to separate the actual, like, what is fake and what have you dreamt about, or what what have you made up in your head.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%, definitely. Perception's everything.
Mm.
Um, what do you think was the most kind of, or the biggest factor that you didn't anticipate when moving? The biggest emotion
Oh.
or biggest like thing that you felt?
I guess it's different at different times of your life. I think, when I first came here, my biggest emotion was excitement and getting started and
Yeah,
changing my life. Um, as the years went on, as I said, it's kind of the emotions were running super high to the point where probably I was in a zone mentally that I wasn't stable. I was experiencing loneliness. I was having basically what I think was probably a mental health crisis, between like anxiety, depression, and a mixture of homesickness all at the same time,
yeah,
which we all know is very hard on the brain. Um,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah,
It's
because there's so
exhausting.
many, yeah,
Mm.
mentally and emotionally exhausting. And um, I don't know much. Like I'm still learning, but I know that the brain just like it literally like it feels as if I was exhausted 24/7.
Mm.
My brain was working overtime.
Yep.
Um, and I felt like I couldn't sort out what was real and what was fake, as I was saying. But then you come to a point where potentially like I was really in that sort of acceptance phase that's when those breakthroughs and things actually happen. Um, and that was probably towards like just before COVID, which was ironic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you cope when you were in the middle of that phase where you felt really lonely and like felt really depressed and homesick and everything? How were you coping with that at the time?
Well, I guess I wasn't. I come from a place where mental health is not spoken about like it is now, but back then in school or anything, no one mentioned anything about mental health. I know I have some family members who actually suffer from schizophrenia, learning difficulties, whatever. But it just touched my family. It wasn't like it didn't directly influence me or affect me. Um, but I didn't realize how it was. Like I didn't know much about it, and I think when I was during those phases, I was really it's hard to put into words. But sometimes I think when you're going through those things, you basically have to like survive or thrive, and I feel I was in survival mode just to be able to get to the next day was really tough. I was experiencing emotions that I'd never felt before, like um, you know, uncontrollable crying for 45 minutes, and then I'd be laughing and joking on a high. And I thought, I'm insane. Like, I'm going insane. Like, and that's hard on family too, because I'm calling them crying for 45 minutes an hour, and then I'll get off the phone and feel 100 times better. And then 45 minutes later, I'm back to that state again. Um, and I think when I got to that really dark place where I thought, oh my goodness, what am I doing with my life? Like, I think I'm going insane. That's when I reached the point where I need to get help. And luckily, Australia has a really good healthcare system, and I was able to reach out to a doctor who got me into a therapist.
Yep.
And that's when I started to realize that I'm not okay. Like
Mm.
you've got to look after yourself in other ways,
Yep.
Yeah. Whether that's
Yeah.
retraining your brain or, um, going back and experiencing those emotions and working on what's the root cause of that issue.
Yeah. Yeah. I think definitely it can take a while sometimes to get to that stage if it can happen quite gradually, where you
Mm,
start to feel down and down and down, and suddenly you're in this point, and you don't quite realize that you need help sometimes.
yeah.
But it's great that you did reach out and get that help. Um, is there anything, like, looking back now, anything that you would have changed or any advice you kind of have for yourself during that time
Mm.
period, knowing what you know now?
I would have said go easier on myself, but obviously in that situation you can't because you really are feeling uncontrolled, like with
Mm.
everything. But I just feel like I was carrying stuff from childhood that I had never worked through. And I didn't realize how much childhood trauma affects, even though it's not really trauma as per se that I think of. When I think of trauma, I think something super serious.
Mm.
Um, but when you're speaking to some therapists or whatever, they call it trauma.
Mm.
And you didn't realize how like words affect you in childhood that you carry through until your adolescence and then on into your 20s. Like I was surviving on revenge words that I thought was driving my whole motivate because I was super motivated here. Like I've never been more motivated in my life in my early 20s,
Yeah.
but I feel like I was doing that in revenge of things that had happened in childhood. And there's only so much motivation, how much revenge you can get on people by making your life better.
Mm.
And then when you start to work through those things, I've noticed that emotions were coming up that I'd never experienced before, as I said, but also like my motivation was dropping. And I think because I was working through stuff and forgiving things and like working things out in my head that it actually made more sense.
Mm.
And now I look back and be like, why did you even think like that? Why did you take that on board? I wish you had have just like never thought about that, you know? But
Yeah,
unfortunately, we're humans and we do.
exactly. Yeah,
Mhm. So I say
100%.
go easy on yourself, and
Mm,
definitely don't put so much pressure on to achieve whenever you're under so much mental stress.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And yeah, especially when you just move somewhere else. Like, I think, like, we know that it's a big change, but a lot of the time people don't realize how big it is, how much it can affect you. So it is important to kind of take your time to get used to a place and just accept that, you're going to feel lots of different things and that's okay.
Yeah,
Um,
and
yeah,
it's perfectly normal to not fit in straight away, and it
definitely.
takes time.
Yeah,
And yeah, everybody's different too.
yeah, exactly. Let's talk a little bit about fitting in and kind of forming an identity somewhere new. And I think this is a really interesting one because um, I think like even just I moved to Adelaide last year just for a year, which is a 2-hour plane ride. It's not the other side of the world. But even there, I kind of felt like in some ways I was different. Like I was wearing different clothes to what I would here, and joining different groups I wouldn't normally join. Um, and yeah, it just kind of and speaking to people differently just kind of changes some things that you do. So how did you find fitting in and kind of being yourself, or did you feel like you kind of formed a new identity in some ways?
Yeah, I feel like when you grow in yourself, you change your identity a little bit. And I think I've learned that over the years that it's okay to be yourself,
Yeah.
and not really care what people say. And it took me a lot, like as I said, therapy to realize that. Like I was holding on to stuff that people said about me, like stupid stuff, you know. Um, but I feel like it's okay to be yourself. Like, and even if you do want to change yourself, this is the perfect opportunity to do that. Like I did come to Australia, and I was kind of, I guess, more during my early like teens and late teens. I was probably very bubbly, very happy. Would always sing, jump around, chat to people, very social. But when I came here, I was very quiet. And it because obviously it was a new thing, and it was all these things were happening. Um, but I really had to push myself back to getting back to that happy person
Yeah.
that I was, and because I generally happy and chatty, you know, and very social, and it took me a while to get back to that, but also change my own identity in a way that I was a bit more free from people's opinions, and free to let myself grow. And if I wanted to change, and if I wanted to be something else, I was happy to do that. Like, um, as I said to you, like when you experience some hard times, you do change. You don't stay the same. Like when I go back home and I see people and I say certain things, they're like, "Oh, you never, like, it's that's not you. That doesn't sound like you." But I was like, "But I've moved on from that person that you
Yeah.
remember." Um, because I'll be a bit more direct, I think now. Whereas our culture at home is very sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh, and
Mm.
I'm okay with being sorry, but sometimes it's people pleasing,
Yep.
and I think I've changed in that way, like just small bits, like oh my is still nice, but there's still that bit of like, that's it over,
Yeah.
um but yeah, creating a new identity, like I mean, there's people here who come and they're totally different to what they were when they were at home, and I think it's fine as long as you're still who you are inside. um People project lots of like personality and like a bigger personality or whatever when they're here, or they go super inside and they
Mm.
become a bit more, quieter. Like everybody changes, and I just think it's best to roll and see how you go and just be who you are,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I
Hmm.
think there are those little kind of small culture changes, like you mentioned, being sorry a lot or being more direct. Those subtle changes that kind of, naturally influence you when you're living somewhere
Yeah,
else.
and the
Yeah.
environmental factors of where you live influence you. Like I remember when I first started my job here in Australia, um, we have a saying at home, "usins," which is like you all.
Mm.
Um, but we would say, "Usins are usins coming out," and everybody used to slaughter me in the first year I was here. You can't say that. That's not correct grammar. That's not a thing. I'm like, but I shouldn't be able to lose who that's what we say or what we do because
Mm.
So then I just said it more. you
Yeah.
know?
Fair enough.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? So
Actu-
like you have to
Yeah.
keep bits and pieces that you want, but then obviously you have to
Mm,
change slight things because like, I had to change the way I was saying certain words. I had to change um sometimes the way I project myself in the workplace just because
yeah.
it wasn't the same as home, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that idea of just keeping bits of yourself that you want.
Mm,
I think that's really important. And I guess like moving somewhere else does kind of make you learn more about yourself in general because you learn more
it
about where you came
does, yeah.
from, but also,
Mm,
yeah, like what you want to keep in yourself.
that's it, yeah.
Um, so we talked a little bit before about loneliness, and obviously building a social network is crucial for mental well-being. So what were the effects of social support or lack of social support and then gaining social support on your mental health? And how long did it take you to kind of build up that stable support network when you got here?
Yeah, I was lucky in a way. I had some friends from the when I came in 2010 on the working holiday, I had some friends, and then when I came back in 2012, a lot of them are still here.
Mhm.
Um, so luckily, I was able to form good bonds with them. But then, as go into the workplace, you get busier. It was hard to maintain those relationships, and now I even think that they're probably not as. I probably speak to maybe like three of them.
Mhm.
So I mean, I going through that sort of period of loneliness was probably a mix of me working, as I said, I wanted to achieve super a lot. So I forced myself to work more, which then socially isolated me. Um, but definitely the when I decided to make a choice of being more social and actually going out and making new friends and force myself into those situations, it was super uncomfortable. It was, yeah, but the support that I gained, the actual internal value went up.
Yeah.
Um, because I just was like, these people have become my family here,
Mm.
because you don't have your own family. Um, and so
Yeah.
it literally it did change my mindset and it changed my happiness
Mm.
level for sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I guess I'm a social being. The more I'm isolated, the worse I probably become. you know.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. We all need that support. And what did you do going back to kind of emotional well-being? How did you maintain that as well as keeping good social connections? How else did you kind of maintain your emotional well-being while moving and then after the move and after you had that kind of dark period?
Well, I suppose when I moved here, I didn't really look after myself at all.
Mm.
Um, my emotions were probably based from other people. Um, I was getting my energy, my empathy, everything. Like I felt like I had no emotions without being with people, and that's probably a really bad place to be in yourself, um, because you're relying on other people's happiness to make you happy. Um, and I guess I was like that. I didn't realize I probably was like that mostly most of my life. Um, and then obviously through going through all this change and this loneliness and getting therapy and coming out after, I really see that I don't need to have tons of friends to make me feel happy. I just need the people in my life that really make me feel something inside, and I also need to, you know, give, like if it's like take people out to dinner or give a gift or something like to make myself or help someone in need, like to make me feel good on the inside. Um, and so like just working out like how that works in your own life, I think is really
Yeah.
important,
I think
which
it's
I didn't
interesting.
know before, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. It's something that you
Mm,
kind of learn. And like, I guess when we're growing up, we kind of just become friends with whoever's around us. But one of the things about moving is you kind of make those choices with who you want to be friends with and who fulfills
it's a
you
choice of
more.
family.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which is
Definitely.
sometimes people come here and they don't have a really good family and they want to get
Mm,
away from that. And I even have someone at work actually who's super glad that he's found his core group of friends because his family aren't really his family like his friends are.
mm,
Um,
yeah.
and that really resonated with me because I was like, I actually got to choose my friends here, like, and I didn't even think about it. I
Mm,
just really gravitated towards these people because they brought so much to me.
yeah. Yeah. No, that's great.
Mm.
Um, and how did you feel when you went back home? You said you went to visit and like it was a bit different chatting to people. What was that like with the first time you went back home after you moved, and consistently since then?
Yeah, so I'm in a very lucky situation. I work as a teacher in a school, so obviously we get the school holidays, which is here is over Christmas.
Mhm.
So I was able to leave early December all the way till like mid late January, every single year. And I made that conscious decision to go every year because I wanted to maintain that connection with my family because they're very important to me. Family's probably, number one.
Mhm.
And I have a very close relationship with my parents, my grandparents, my sister. Um, and the first time I went, I think it was obviously very emotional because you've been away and this is your first time living overseas. Like, you're recording every moment and you're crying and, it's all
Yep.
very emotional. But
Mm.
as the years obviously get on, um, I always thought in my head, oh, I'm going home next year. I'm going home next year. So I guess I didn't really pay too much attention to it. But obviously, I've been here for so long now. Um, I'm still going home every Christmas because it's just I like the whole Christmas time period and stuff like that with my family.
Yeah.
And plus, you get to see them for so long. But
Yeah.
the emotions change. It's just like I'm glad to be going home.
Yeah.
But then you also have that gladness to come back.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah,
think,
nice.
yeah, that just continues throughout the whole thing. Like, obviously, there was times where I have went home, and during that time, I was really mentally, I guess, unwell. Um, I really was like, I'm not coming back to Australia. That's me done. Like, and I don't want to go back. Like, and I was having all these emotions, but
Mm.
I think that was just because of what I was going through at the time.
Yeah. What was it
Yeah.
that made you come back? Were your, like, family suggesting it or?
Well, actually, my family were the opposite. They were wanted me to come home because they thought I was very
Mm.
unwell. Like, obviously, because I was experiencing homesickness to the point where I'd never experienced that before, and all these other things. Um, I was having side effects that I'd never had before, like face numbness because of anxiety, like stuff that never
Extreme.
had happened, panic attacks, like stuff that I'd
Yeah.
never experienced before.
Mm.
Um, and so mom was like, "You need to come home. I think you need to come home. Like this, we can look after you here. At least when you're here, we have us."
Mm.
Um, but something in me just said, like, "You're not ready to leave. Like, don't give up." And I think that was the motivation in me because I was like I'm still very motivated to do well, to better myself, and I think that really forced me every single time to come, even though like one year I'm like, yes, I'm ready to leave and go, and then the next year I'm like crying, don't want to go. Like it's just it's the emotions of being an expat. It's
Yeah.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel at home here now, or does it still feel like Ireland's the home?
Yeah, like as I said, I think from COVID when I accepted everything, I've really come to the terms in my head. I'm breaking it up into two different parts that I have both homes and
Mm.
both are home. Um,
Yeah.
and that has see since I've accepted that has really limited the emotions have got less strong.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think that's just because once you finally accept something in your head, like you stop thinking about going crazy in it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Hmm.
Just let it lie. Definitely.
Yeah.
Um. So, what advice would you give to someone on how to cope with moving overseas, given all the experiences that you've had with it?
Wow. Definitely it's not easy. If you're coming for a holiday travel, I think you will find it a lot easier because it's only for a short time. But if you're like coming to actually live and move your whole life here, that I think that you really need to pay attention and give yourself space and time to adjust. And it's okay not to be okay. Um, because I always thought I had to be perfect when I was a kid, and I always
Hmm.
felt like if I stepped out of line, I would be like there was some punishment was going to come down, and you know. But I realized that it's okay here when you're here is to like to have a bad day because
Yeah.
you're still bringing all the stuff you're bringing with you. You're just having experience in a new location, which is sometimes way harder to experience it in your comfort zone. And so I definitely say if you're feeling like stressed, is reach out to community and like find your tribe is another big one.
Yeah.
Like if it's sporting or like expat group or immerse yourself in actual real Australian culture. because I find sometimes that really helped me settle, like people who were here for long term rather than like people who were just here for like 6 months.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And are there any resources that you'd kind of suggest in particular? I guess obviously your podcast is a great one for people moving to Australia.
Um, I have a few blogs on my website as well, but I also suggest like reaching out to groups like Facebook groups. There's a lot of people who have the similar feelings and they just don't speak about it. So if you post um, and put yourself out there, and it's scary, um, but you can definitely find people who are in the same boat as you. But I would say don't wallow in it, because the more that you wallow in it, the more strong it gets. And also just in general, like those feelings might take over. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. Obviously, it can be hard to like not to wallow in it if you're kind of by yourself and you don't have those connections. But yeah, as you said, it's important to reach out and speak to people about it, so that you can start to feel better.
Yeah, and there's
Well,
lots of organizations here as well, and I've noticed
yeah.
that the healthcare system's so good. Like if you have an issue, you just go to your GP and say, "Hey, I need a mental health care plan," and they're like, "Sweet," like yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas at home, like it's so hard to even. I know people who are still
Yeah.
waiting to get seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
Mm.
But yeah, that's good that you found the help that you need down here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing all of that with us. I've just got one last question, which I did not prepare you for, but what is your favorite fact about psychology in general?
I have been following someone called Dr. Leaf, and she talks about retraining your brain. And I just didn't know that the brain has so much capacity. I just like it stores so much information,
Yeah.
and um, also like retraining thoughts that you had once before and getting rid of those bad. Because when you think of something, I always think like, oh, cringe, like that you had that emotion with it, and
Hmm.
I didn't know you could push past that. I always thought away from it to
Yeah.
get my mind off it, but I didn't know you could actually retrain your brain to stop that happening.
Yeah.
um, but also, I just love in general that um, your mindset's not fixed,
Yeah.
and that you can have a growth mindset basically to change you. You know,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
it is so. Yeah, the mind and the body is like unreal.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff. I love learning about it
Yeah,
too.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so thank you so much for coming on. And like we said at the start, I think often people don't realize the impact of living abroad. Obviously, it's really exciting, but you can also come with all these other emotions, and it's important to kind of be aware of that. So yeah, thank you for sharing your story, and hopefully this has helped. At least one of my two followers, or other
No,
people out
definitely
there
not.
watching.
Yeah, no, thank you so
All
much for having me on. I appreciate it.